Imagine you're celebrating like a huge city anniversary, like a centennial, and your employer decides to give everyone a bonus
Oh, wow.
to mark the occasion.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
But what if that bonus landed you right in the middle of a Supreme Court case?
Oh, no.
That's what happened to the employees of the Baguio Water District in the Philippines.
Oh, wow.
And today we're going to be diving into all the legal twists and turns of this case.
This case is really interesting.
It is.
It really highlights how important it is to understand the law,
Right.
especially when you're dealing with public funds. Even if you have good intentions, things can get really complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking at the case of Teresita P. Guzman et al. Versus Commission on Audit. Okay, GR no. 245274. It was decided on October 13th, 2020.
Okay.
So back in 2009, Baguio City was celebrating its 100th anniversary.
Wow.
Pretty big deal.
Huge.
The Baguio Water District, or BWD,
Okay.
wanted to do something special for its employees.
Okay.
So they authorized a 50% salary bonus.
At the time, it probably seemed like a win-win, right?
Yeah.
The employees get a nice bonus and the city celebrates its centennial.
Right.
But as we'll see, things weren't quite that straightforward.
Yeah, not quite, because 3 years later, in May 2012, the celebration was kind of stopped.
Oh.
When the Commission on Audit, also known as COA, issued a notice of disallowance.
Okay.
They basically said, hold on, this bonus isn't legal, and you have to return the money.
A notice of disallowance is a pretty serious matter.
Right.
It means that the COA, which is like a watchdog for government spending, found that an expenditure was irregular or improper or maybe even illegal.
Wow.
In this case, we're talking over 1.2 million pesos.
Wow. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So how did the BWD react to this? Did they just accept the COA's decision?
No, not at all. They actually appealed the disallowance.
Okay.
And the case went through the COA regional office. And eventually it made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
They had a few arguments.
Okay, so let's break down these arguments.
Yeah.
What was the BWD's defense for giving out this bonus?
Okay, so first they claimed that the notice of disallowance was invalid.
Oh.
Because it was missing a signature from the supervising auditor.
Oh, interesting.
They also argued that the BWD wasn't actually subject to the national austerity measures that the COA cited to disallow the bonus.
So they were basically saying, we're not playing by those rules.
Right.
I'm curious to hear how the COA responded to those points.
Yeah, so the COA actually had some pretty solid counter-arguments.
Okay.
Regarding the missing signature, they pointed out that there wasn't actually a supervising auditor assigned to the BWD at that time.
Oh.
So the audit team leader was actually authorized to issue the notice.
So it was more of a technicality.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what about the argument that the BWD wasn't subject to those austerity measures?
Right. So that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
You see, water districts in the Philippines, they're actually considered to be government-owned and controlled corporations, or GOCCs.
GOCCs.
Which puts them under the oversight of the president, meaning they are subject to those national policies, including the austerity measures.
So they couldn't just claim independence from the national directives.
Yeah, exactly.
But this brings up what I think is the most compelling argument that the BWD made.
Okay.
Which is this concept of good faith. They were basically saying, look, we weren't trying to do anything shady here.
Right.
We were just trying to celebrate an important milestone for our city and show appreciation for our employees.
Yeah.
Does good faith even hold any weight in a legal case like this?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think a lot of people can relate to. I mean, who hasn't bent a rule here or there with, good intentions?
Right.
But in this case, the Supreme Court found that good faith, while admirable, doesn't automatically justify an illegal expenditure.
So even if they were trying to do something positive, their actions were still considered a violation.
Exactly.
Right.
The court determined that the BWD's certifying and approving officers had a responsibility to be aware of and to follow the law.
Okay.
Even when they were celebrating a special occasion.
This raises so many questions.
Yeah.
Like, if the BWD officers are ultimately responsible, what happens to the employees who actually received the bonus?
Right.
Did they get to keep the money?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated. We'll get into those details in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've established that the BWD, despite their good intentions, messed up by authorizing this bonus.
Mm-hmm.
But where does that leave the employees who received the money?
Right.
It seems kind of unfair to punish them for something they didn't really have control over.
You've hit on a really important point.
Yeah.
It's something that the Supreme Court grappled with as well. The court really recognized that the employees were kind of put in a difficult situation.
Right.
They had received this bonus, most likely spent at least some of it.
Yeah.
And now, years later, they're being told they have to return it.
I can only imagine the stress and confusion that must have caused.
Definitely.
So did the court offer any guidance on how to handle this fairly?
They did.
Okay.
In their decision, the court discussed this legal principle of solutio indebiti.
Solutio indebiti.
Yeah, basically means payment of what is not due.
Okay. So help me understand this. How does solutio indebiti apply to this case?
Okay, so imagine you accidentally get an extra paycheck.
Right.
Ethically, you know you're not supposed to keep it.
Right.
And legally, you would be obligated to return it, even if it wasn't really your fault.
Right.
And it's a similar situation here.
Okay.
The court basically determined that while the employees weren't at fault, they still benefited from a payment that was considered illegal. Therefore, they had to return the money.
That makes sense, but it still feels kind of rough.
Yeah.
For those employees. Did the court acknowledge that potential unfairness?
They did. The court actually went to great lengths to explain the reasoning for their decision. They wanted to be very clear that while they understood that it was difficult for the employees, they also emphasized that the law had to be upheld and that the BWD officers were ultimately responsible for making sure that the bonus was legal.
So the employees were kind of caught in the crossfire, but the court made it clear that the buck stopped with the BWD officers.
Exactly. The court really highlighted that approving officers have a duty to be diligent and to make sure that their actions comply with the laws and regulations. And they found that the officers were grossly negligent in their duties.
Wow.
Which is what ultimately led to this whole situation.
This case really emphasizes how important it is to understand the law.
Yeah.
Even for something like a bonus. Seems like a pretty harsh lesson.
It is. It's definitely a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
This case demonstrates that ignorance of the law is not an excuse, especially when you're dealing with public funds.
So what was the final outcome?
Yeah.
Were the employees forced to return the whole bonus?
Yeah.
What happened to the BWD officers who authorized it?
So the court ordered the employees to return the bonus money.
Wow.
And the BWD officers were held accountable for their negligence. But I think beyond those immediate consequences, this case really set a precedent for future cases that involve public funds.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
The court's decision serves as like a warning to other government agencies and public officials.
Right.
To be really careful when they're making these decisions.
Especially financial decisions.
Right. But, you know, beyond the legal ramifications, I think this case raises some ethical questions, too. Like, where do we draw the line between celebrating and staying within the rules?
Yeah.
And how do we balance accountability with fairness when something like this happens?
It's tough.
Yeah.
Those are excellent questions.
Yeah.
And there are not always easy answers.
Right.
But I think this case really forces us to think about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And to consider how our actions can impact other people.
Yeah. It's a reminder that even well-intentioned decisions can have consequences that we don't expect.
Right.
Especially when we're talking about public funds.
Exactly. So for our listener who might be hearing about this case for the first time, what would you say is like the main takeaway from this situation?
Yeah. What should they be thinking about?
Well, I think this case really drives home the point that we all have a responsibility to be aware of the rules, even in situations that seem celebratory or straightforward.
It's amazing how this started with a city wanting to celebrate, and it ended up kind of like highlighting the importance of accountability and the law. Makes you think twice about, you know, just assuming things are okay just because your intentions are good.
Definitely. It really underscores that idea that ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with like public funds. There's like this added layer of responsibility to make sure everything's done properly.
And that responsibility doesn't just fall on like the higher ups, right? Like the employees in this case.
Yeah.
They had to return the money, even though they didn't make the decision.
Exactly. This case highlights that concept of like collective responsibility.
Yeah.
Even when you might feel like you're caught in the middle.
Right.
The court recognized that. But ultimately they said that upholding the law and ensuring accountability.
Yeah.
Those are really important.
Tough, but I get it.
Yeah.
It's important to, maintain trust and make sure that taxpayer money is used responsibly.
Absolutely. Imagine if government agencies could just spend money however they wanted, even with good intentions.
Yeah, it would be chaos.
Total chaos.
So for our listener,
Yeah.
what's the one big takeaway you want them to have?
I think it's twofold.
Okay.
First, you should always try to stay informed. Be aware of the rules and regulations, even in situations that seem straightforward or celebratory.
Okay.
And second, just remember that your actions can have unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Even those taken with good intentions.
Right.
Especially when other people are involved.
It's a good reminder.
It is.
This case shows that the law, while it can be complex and sometimes rigid, it's there to protect us.
Absolutely.
Make sure things are fair and that people are held accountable.
Right. It's not always about punishing people.
Right.
It's about having a system that works for everyone.
This deep dive into this case has been really eye-opening.
It has.
It's amazing how a simple celebration can turn into all this.
I know. It's really interesting how a celebration can lead to all these legal and ethical questions.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Of course.
We hope you found it informative and insightful.
Yeah, we always encourage you to keep asking questions.
Yes.
And learning more about these legal issues.
Yeah, because they really do shape our world.
They do.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive
for
more explorations into fascinating cases and legal topics.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive.
So stay tuned.